Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 173, IO 533e. Io and Socrates have wrongly, in my opinion, concluded that someone with a techne should be able to talk about any practitioner of that techne, but Io can only talk about Homer well. And this has forced Socrates to come up with an alternative explanation. If Io doesn't have techne, what does he have? And the explanation is that he has a divine power, their dynamis. And he said that this divine power is like that in a magnet. Why is the power in a magnet divine? Probably because it's a power which was not understood. If something is not understood, we tend to say that it's magic. But in ancient times, if it was not understood, the cause of a phenomenon would be a god or gods. Socrates hasn't yet said what the divine power in a rhapsode is. He's still talking about magnets. Pasi de tutois ex ekenes tes lithu, he dynamis anertetai. The power from that stone is connected to all these iron rings. Now Socrates turns to the power in Io. Huto de kai he musa en theos men poie aute, diadeton en theon tuton allon enthusiadzonton hormathos exartatai. In this way too, the muse herself makes people enthused, where enthused means having a god inside. Then Socrates continues, and through these enthused, a chain of other enthusing people is connected. We can already see here that Io himself isn't the magnet, nor are the poets. Homer is not the magnet which gives Io divine power, but the muse herself is the magnet. And the muse, first of all, contacts poets, and then through the poets, the rhapsodes. Pantisgar hoiteton epon poietai hoi agathoi, uk ek technes al entheoiontes kai katechomenoi pantatautata kala legusi poiemata, kai hoi melopoioi hoi agathoi hosautos, hosper hoi corubantiontes, uk emphrones ontes orhuntai, huto kai hoi melopoioi, uk emphrones ontes ta kalamele tauta poiusin, al epedanem bosin esten harmonian kai eston rhythmon, bakhiusi kai katechomenoi, hosper hai bakhai aruontai ekton potamon, meli kai gala katechomenai, emphrones deusai u, kaiton melopoion he psuche tuto ergadzetai operautoi legusi. For all the poets of epic poetry, the good poets, not out of techne, but being enthused and possessed, say these fine poems. And the lyric poets as well, in this way, the good lyric poets, just as the corribants dance when they are not in their right mind, so too the lyric poets make these fine songs when they are not in their right mind. But whenever they step into the harmony and the rhythm, they become Bacchic and are possessed, just as the Bacchae are possessed when they draw honey and milk from the rivers, not being in their right mind. And the soul of the lyric poets does this, which is what they themselves say. So Socrates, not very subtly, is using what the poets themselves say to corroborate his claim that the poets, when they are poets, have no sense at all because they are being guided by the muse in this case. And it's interesting that he describes the phenomenon as the soul acting while they have no sense. They're out of their mind. The soul is doing the work. This is reminiscent of the story about anamnesis in Meno, where the man knows nothing at all, while the soul knows everything. It's the same dichotomy, the rational soul, the irrational man. All the details, of course, are completely different, but that doesn't matter. We should ask ourselves what Socrates is aiming at by appearing to try to persuade Io through rhetoric, using the language of Io, poetic language, to persuade Io that he doesn't have a techne, he is actually enthusing when he does what he does as a rhapsode. We shouldn't fall into the trap that many Platonists do, which is to consider all of Socrates' interlocutors as sheer yes men. There are interlocutors who deny everything Socrates says, who argue with him, but there are, of course, many interlocutors who agree with what he says, and I would suggest that they agree with what Socrates says because they find what he says to be acceptable. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Io actually likes to hear that he, being associated with poets, is mindless when he is a rhapsode, given that he is divinely possessed. We shouldn't forget the evidence Socrates supplies from another source as well. The Corybantes are the followers of Cybele, the mother goddess who came from the east originally and became an accepted part of the Greek pantheon here and there. She's a very ancient goddess, and she was particularly popular with women, and the women would have fertility rituals, that sort of thing, and the women would become ecstatic, probably using drugs, and would dance around in a wild state, and they would appear to have no sense. They would be out of their minds. Socrates also mentions the Bacchae, and these are the female followers of Dionysus. Celebrating Dionysus was one of the few ways women in a repressive society could enjoy themselves, have a bit of freedom, and they would go off at night to secret rituals where they probably took drugs and became ecstatic and danced wildly, just like the Corybantes. These two sets of women then seem to prove the point that humans, in this case women, could lose their minds because of a god or a goddess. In the case of poets, it isn't immediately obvious that they're completely out of their senses. They don't dance around ecstatically, so adducing the women would seem to help prove the point. Not that Io, a rhapsode, would need the point to be proved, but Io appears to be the sort of person who appreciates a touch of rhetorical argument. He's already said that he appreciates listening to people like Socrates, presumably meaning sophists, because there were no other dialecticians at the time, and people didn't even recognize Socrates as a dialectician. Socrates continues, Legus igarde puthen prosemas hoi poetai, hoti apokrenon meliroton ek muson ke pontinon kai napon, drepominoi tamele hemin ferusin, hosper hai melitai, kai autoi huto petominoi, kai lethe legusi. For at any rate, the poets say in our presence that they pluck songs out of honey-flowing springs from certain gardens and groves of muses and bring them, the songs, to us and fly in the same way as bees. And they say true things. Socrates continues to use the poets as witnesses about themselves. They are portraying themselves not as creators of poetry, but as messengers. They fly from the muses to ordinary people with songs, just as bees carry honey from the gardens of the muses, apparently. It might be worth pointing out that in Greek, song and honey are both neuter words beginning with mel. Song is to melos and honey is to meli. That they sound so similar makes the story here so much more compelling. Socrates is pulling out all the rhetorical stops for the benefit of Io, who appreciates rhetoric. If we wanted to ruin the analogy, we would point out that the honey-flowing springs in the gardens of the muses are not the muses themselves. That is to say that the poetry is not even from the mind of a muse. It's simply something in the gardens of the muses. What we would really have wanted would be a song from the mind of a muse, which is conveyed to the soul of a poet when he is supposedly composing the poem, and from there it is mindlessly conveyed to the soul of a rhapsode, who then mindlessly conveys it to the audience. In my experience, honey doesn't work like that. The bees collect pollen, and then honey is made in the hive, and it is then consumed by humans and is hopefully not spread to other humans